tend to stop. I'll put this down here. I'm not sure if it shows up in there or not. It shows up slightly.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, how many people use it now, iNaturalist? Okay, about half. This probably isn't a typical presentation that I've watched lots of videos on iNaturalist, but my emphasis, since I've been creating lots of projects and stuff, is to more interested in what the data looks like, what it means, why don't my observations show up in my projects, how do I draw them so that I get more inclusion of my observations in projects. And the first big one I did was South Carolina State Parks. They did a project and I looked through all of that and I wasn't real thrilled. So I made my own version and I'll show some examples of what they did and what I did and why. And so if you decide to create your own projects, you might want to take some of that into account. So we're breaking it up into 4 sections, and I'll answer some questions at the end of each of these. But basically, there's observations, and then geographic. The places and bounding boxes are basically how you isolate those observations in projects, and then we'll get into. We'll actually open up the website, and I'll demonstrate some of the simple things like uploading observations and editing and stuff. So, okay, yeah, and it is both a web and a phone app, and each of those does things that are a little bit different. So there are some things that I like to do on the phone app. And the other thing that you're going to find is that these are just some of the things that I like to do on the PC and some of the things I can do on the phone that are a little bit different. So once you get used to doing it, you might want to find out which version of the app works best for what you're trying to do. And the other thing too you're going to find is that Android and PCs don't look the same as Apple and Mac. And the biggest problem seems to be that Androids and PCs use Google Maps as backgrounds. And they also allow you to see the boundary files, the KML files, and Apple doesn't let you do that. So, but I'll show you that, and you can open up your own phone and see. Okay, so right now, actually they're up over 100 million now, but you can see it's a worldwide thing now. There's observations all over the world, and out of the box, they have drawn boundaries, or what they call places, for all the countries and 2 administrative levels below. So for us, that means they've done the United States, they've done South Carolina for us, and they've done all the counties. So you don't have to do anything for those. For instance, if you wanted to go out right now and create a project on the birds of Lexington County, you could do that because the county has already been drawn for you.
Is there a legend that goes with the map that shows the different density categories there?
No, you just have to basically zoom in to see. And the other thing you're going to notice too is that there's a lot of bleed out around the edges, and those are obscured observations. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but you're going to see a lot more observations in parks and stuff like that. So They've got them color-coded by taxa, and they've also got them, the general observations are these little push pins, and once they've been identified to research grade, they get a little dot in the center. And then the geoprivacy, the normal one is a little push pin, and if it's obscured, it's kind of a fuzzy little dot. And we'll talk about what obscured means in a minute. But so here's just a typical one. Here's the birds of Congaree National Park. They're all blue dots. Almost all of them have so they've all been research grade, which means that at least 2 other people besides you have decided that that ID is correct, like this eastern phoebe. Okay, yep, they've agreed that that's what that is. What's that?
I thought blue was amphibian.
Well, the blue is actually multiple ones.
Just to keep it somewhere too.
Yeah, well, they don't have enough colors to cover everything, so there are some that so.
Bill, where was it that 2 other people agreed? Where was that on the screen?
We'll show you that in a minute. When we get to so this is basically what an observation is you have to have generally you have to have some sort of image or a sound file. They do allow you to leave it blank, but please don't do that. There's an ID, and that's probably the thing that most people like about iNaturalist is you put the picture in and you hit the little thing right here, and it will suggest an ID for you. And it's either really good or really horrible.
Depending on your picture quality?
No, actually, they said that it takes about 30, it has to see about 30 pictures of something before it recognizes them. So if I have found that it does a really good job with birds, does a generally horrible job with beetles. It has seen lots and lots of May beetles, but it still doesn't recognize them.
So the more that it sees and uses in the database, the better the ID.
Yeah, and like I said, the birds, it's seen all the birds, and if it's a halfway decent picture, it'll probably get the good ID. Of course, the date and time, the location description, and that's automatically filled in, but it's usually gobbledygook. If you go to a really large park, the description that it's going to give you might be a street, might be the county, who knows what it's going to be. But so typically what I do is when I'm loading them is I replace that with where I actually was. Like in this case, it's Musgrove Mill. Now the location, it consists of 2 parts. It's the actual latitude and longitude, and then the accuracy. And that accuracy is kind of problematic, but it's important because it determines whether or not your observation will show up in the projects. Then there's geoprivacy, and so they do allow you to hide the specific location of certain things. So the default is open, which means everybody can see it and they can see the location of where it was. Private, generally it's not a good idea to use that because nobody can see it. And so it's of no value to pretty much anybody. Now the obscured ones, there's basically 2 ways that happens. You can obscure it so that if for instance you're doing a lot of it in your neighborhood and you don't want everybody to see that you've got a huge cluster of observations in your neighborhood, you can obscure them all. And basically it just moves the location. And then the taxa, they do that automatically for things like, Nakoni Bell, automatically obscured. Box turtles, automatically obscured, not because they're endangered, but because they're in danger of being poached. So that's done automatically. Then we've got data quality. And the default when you load it up is it needs ID. And once 2 or 3 people have agreed with your ID, then it goes to what they call research grade, and so that's about as good as it gets. And then there's casual, which is captive cultivated. So if you go to the zoo, that's captive, a zoo animal, or if you were to shoot a picture of a cornfield, that'd be cultivated. But there's some issues with how that's implemented, and I'll get to that in a little bit.
Do you have to have a picture to log something in here?
Yes.
What terms of the accuracy, I've never noticed that before, with the percent or feet or?
No, it's a radius in meters. But we're going to get to that okay, so when you put a picture and you hit the ID, it's going to, usually it gives you, we're pretty sure it's this, and then it'll give you some top 10 suggestions usually. And so I picked this one because this is a common problem. I mean, this is just a common northern water snake. And it said it's pretty sure that it's an Asian moccasin. I'm pretty sure it's not. But you'll notice that the top suggestion was the common water snake. So that one is actually right. And you'll see that fairly often where we'll pick a genus that, if all the top suggestions are not a species of that genus, then you can be pretty sure that that's bunkum. So, and you can also, if you don't see anything, you can actually type it in. But if you do type it in, you need to make sure that it's something that's already in the database. Otherwise, it's not going to really recognize it, and it's going to become unknown. So, for instance, if I hit snakes, I could just hit enter, and it's going to give me this little dark leaf. And it's going to go in there as unknown. So what I have to do is I have to make sure that I go down here and hit the picture with the snakes, and that means that that's actually in their database. So usually the only time you're going to run into that problem is if you know it under one scientific name and maybe the nomenclature has changed, or iNaturalist has used different nomenclature. So you just have to make sure that you're picking something that's in the list. Okay, so there's basically 2 ways that the locations are put in. A lot of people don't geotag, and so you can just go ahead and if you go to Paris Mountain State Park, you can take 20 pictures. You can just go and take them all, dump them right into one spot in the middle of the park, put an accuracy circle around it, and they want you to make that accuracy circle as big as that encompasses all the area where you think all of those observations were seen.
Can you back up? That sounded like a black box there. You take all these things and dump them in.
I will show you here in a second. The other way is geotagged, and there's lots of different ways that can be done. And we'll do that one next. So here, for instance, this was a park that scan went on recently. This is Lynch's River, and you can see that you got all the different observations. You got some greens, you got some blues, so if you were to just look at that at face value, you'd say, okay, well, that makes perfect sense. It's kind of following the trails in the park. And just sort of keep in the back of your mind this box around it. That's kind of their way of limiting what kind of observations that end up showing up if there's a project for this place, and if the accuracy falls outside of that bounding box, they won't show up. But let's just give an example. One of the guys here on the trip, he took 13 observations and 10 species, and he just plopped them on the road. He just gathered them all up and plopped them on the road with an accuracy of 4 meters. So that's okay, but basically what that tells you is that you really have no idea where in the park he saw these things, all those 13, because they were all, he put them all together, and that's extremely common. Everybody does that. I mean, I've seen projects where people have put 100 observations all in a big group and just popped them right in the center. And so you can be sure that, you can be reasonably sure that, yes, he saw all 13 of those things in Lynch's River County Park, but you could see from the previous slide, you can't tell which ones were geotagged and which ones were manually located. So this one's going to look just like any of the others. So you don't really know without actually going in and digging around for them. So here's the next one. Another person on that trip did 13 observations, and they moved it a little further up, but they put a big accuracy circle. They did 527 meters. And that's more along the lines of what they had in mind, because you're basically telling them that I saw everything within that circle. The only thing you have to be careful of is if you make that too big, again, those observations won't show up in the projects. Now, I'll tell you why in a little bit. Okay. The other option, of course, is you can geotag. And a lot of things, a lot of cameras, lots of phones have it already built in. You can do it external. There's even Bluetooth GPSs now. So really the main thing to take away from this is that I don't care what kind of camera you have or how old it is, you can geotag. You might have to buy a GPS, you might have to buy some software, but it is possible to do it. So, for instance, your phone obviously has one. The Olympus has a built-in GPS, and some cameras even have, manufacturers even have little plug-in ones that you can put on the side of the camera. Very convenient. Well, it depends on the camera.
I mean, but it's reasonable.
About probably $100. The old school way was you actually took a data log with your Garmin GPS, and you took your pictures and you dumped them both onto your computer, and then you would geotag them with some software like Lightroom or RoboGeo, or there's lots of different software that will actually geotag your photos. But like I said, that was kind of the way you had to do it for a long time.
Sometimes, Bill, my camera doesn't have a geotag, but my phone does. And sometimes I'll take a photo with both.
Yeah.
So I'll have.
And actually, that's getting to be the common way to do it now. Most of the camera companies now, instead of putting a GPS in the camera, they have an app on your phone. And so, like the Canon one, it will actually, you have to be in constant communication between the camera and the phone for it to work. But my Olympus, it actually does like the old school way does. It will actually create a data log, and then when I'm all done, I connect the phone to the camera, and it will geotag them. So we're not really going to get too much into that, but and then if you really want accuracy, you can actually you can get something like this Bad Elf GPS, and it will actually take over for the GPS in your phone or tablet, and it does a much better job, but you're still running the app that's on the phone. So, like I said, it all depends on the brand and stuff, but if you wanted to do it, you can do it. Now this was, not every app records accuracy, but this was someone actually went to the trouble to figure out how much accuracy they were getting with their Android phone. So if you're standing where the photographer was and taking a picture, he's telling you that 68% of the time you will fall within that accuracy circle. But 32% of the time, that calculated location and accuracy is actually going to be outside of where you are. So there's a good chance that you're not even going to be close. So this is basically what's happening. You're taking a picture, you've got the GPS in your camera, and you take a picture of a flower, you take a picture of a deer, and the GPS calculates your position and puts it into the file, and that's what's loaded into iNaturalist. But the thing to remember is that GPS location has nothing to do with the location of the flower or the deer. It is only your location. So it's not, all those little push pins you see are not the real locations of deers or bugs or flowers. They're the locations of where the photographer was standing when he took that picture of that deer or the flower. So, and there is absolutely no way to know how far away the flower or the deer or the bird was from you or from where the push pins actually ended up. So, because I think a lot of people, from talking to them, they think that when they see those little push pins, they really think that that's the location of the flower and the deer and stuff. No. Assuming it's geotagged, it's where the person was standing when he saw them. So what's the consequence of that? Well, this is a place I used to go a lot, and it has a couple of big southern red oaks in the middle of a field. And so somebody probably with their phone took a picture of that tree, and you can see that the accuracy circle is 50 meters radius, 100 meters in diameter. And the tree, the actual subject, is not even within that radius. So, and that's very common. Anything big or far away. And then the other thing too, if you look at this and you can see that, well, what happens if 20 people were to go out in that field and take pictures of that tree from different places? You know, they take a picture here, they take a picture here, they take a picture here, take a picture here. When you look at iNaturalist, you're going to think there's a forest of southern red oaks. But no, there's two of them. But that's a consequence of the GPS location is the photographer, not the tree. And one of the things you can do to help mitigate that is a lot of people will take a picture of the trunk, maybe some leaves, and then maybe go way out and shoot a picture of the whole thing. So if you want to try to get it closer, take a picture of the trunk first, and that's closer to the location of the actual tree, then take a picture of the leaves, and then take the far away picture. Okay, another very, very common thing. Here's it's an observation deck and really popular at this time of year especially. There's a rookery of great blue herons. So they got a location, they've got some accuracy, 5 meters, and yeah, that's probably pretty good. He was standing on that observation deck looking at those great blue herons. That great blue herons is way out here. And so you're going to run into that all the time with, like, you're standing on the shore of the ocean and looking out at birds. The geotag location is going to be on the shore. Now, usually what I will do in this case is I can move that location out to that. And if I remember, I usually do. At least get it out into the water, or in this case, get it out into the thing, but you can't be sure that people will do that.
When you say you move it, how do you do it?
I will show you.
Patience is a virtue.
Okay, so, and then this is kind of the last one to show you that this is Lee State Park, and you can see that there's all of the observations are kind of centered around that main loop road. And at first blush, you might say, well, of course. I filtered on just the birds of there, and you can see that the observations are still circled around that road. But if you actually start looking at the actual individual observations, there is no way that those are actually sitting on the road. But that is where the photographer was standing when he saw that heron or that bird or that. So it's more kind of a mindset. You have to kind of, if it's a flower at your feet, you stand a halfway decent chance of that's probably close to where that thing is. But if it's a bird, no, it's where was he standing when he saw that bird? And in a lot of cases, especially these down here, down along the river, those birds may not have actually even been in the park, but the observations will still show up because you were standing in the park when you saw the picture of the birds, when you took the picture of the birds. Okay, there's basically three kinds of geoprivacy. Right out of the gate, everything is open. And now the obscured one was, like I said, you can do it, or if it's the taxa, it will do it for you automatically if it's in their database. And they basically set it up such that it's a 0.2 degree area, which on the equator is 22 by 22 kilometers. So that's a pretty good sized area. In South Carolina, in Columbia, that works out to about 18 by 22 kilometers. And that's a problem for projects. And I'll tell you why here in a little bit. But so whenever if you obscure your observations or if they're automatically obscured, it's going to sort of pick a random location in a rectangle. It's 18 by 22 kilometers. So it's reasonably effective at hiding the true location of your objects, your subject.
Let me get this straight. Sometimes iNaturalist obscures something if it's on an endangered species list.
Yeah,
But if you happen to find something that's rare but not on that list, you can obscure it.
yes.
Gotcha.
Or you can just obscure it because you just don't want people to know exactly where it was you saw it.
Right.
Like around my house, if you look, you can find my house in there, because I don't obscure them.
Yeah, and like I said, as far as the taxa obscured ones go, there's two gotchas on that. For instance, the Oconee bells, if you put in Oconee bells and identify it as an Oconee bell, it will get obscured right away. But if you only identify it to genus, that's not obscured. So if somebody is knowledgeable and they saw that you had, a picture of an Oconee bell and you had it only identified to Shortia, and they're going to know where that is. And the other thing too, of course, is it has to be identified. You could, for instance, if box turtles are always obscured because they're in danger of being poached. But if you identified it as a slider or a cooter or whatever, that won't be obscured. So you could have the world's rarest plant that looks like a dandelion, and it's going to be out there for everybody to see. Private, I don't really have any value for that at all. That means basically, there might be some research groups or something that do that, but that basically nobody can see where that is. So we're not going to talk about private anymore. But so when you look at it, an open one, you get a position, latitude, longitude, and an accuracy circle. And if you look at the observation, you'll see that it's just a little push pin with the circle. Now, the obscured ones, and they call this rectangle, which you will never see, except on the, when you actually pull up an observation, they call it an obscuration rectangle. I don't know who talks like that, but, so, yeah. So in South, like I said, in South Carolina, that's 18 by 22 kilometers. And if you have a whole bunch of obscured observations in one place, you'll see that they tend to group in a clump like that. So here's a box turtle. If you look at South Carolina for box turtles, you will see that they're all obscured. So, so instead of seeing a bunch of push pins, you'll see a bunch of fuzzy circles. And if you look at the individual observation, you'll see that it's got this little obscuration rectangle. It's 18 by 22 circle. And you'll see the little circle with the dot, and that indicates that that's obscured, if you hadn't already figured that out. So now you can go in, and they don't give you the option to filter on it, but you can go in and do a URL search for all of the private and obscured observations. But I really don't know why anybody would care to do that. I just did this as an exercise to see if I could, but it's really not of much value. The only other thing too you might want to think about is if you're going someplace and you're on a trail and all of your observations are open except for one in the middle. And maybe that one was obscured because it was rare. It's kind of good form to go ahead and delete the time and change the date, because if somebody could see that and say, well, you took that at 2 o'clock on Thursday, and they're going to go in and filter on what other things were you looking at 2 o'clock on Thursday. You know, they're going to see this blue one and they're going to see this red one, and they're going to be able to figure out, oh, okay, the obscured one was somewhere between there. But if you if you delete the time so they don't have any frame of reference, and maybe change the date to a day or two before, it makes it a little tougher for the poachers to figure out what you're doing. Okay, and the final aspect of an observation is what they call data quality. Like I said, everything comes in as needs ID. And once 2 out of 3 people identify it, it gets the little stamp of approval as research grade. And this was taken from their definition of casual. They say the community agrees the organism isn't wild or naturalized. Well, it's not really true. Anybody can flag anybody's observation as casual. And I'm really not fond of that. So, because there is, captive seems to be fairly well understood. Cultivated, I get corn, I get cotton, but if a tree was planted 50 years ago, a lot of people might say that that was cultivated. If it was planted 100 years ago, they might say, that's became wild. I'll give you a couple of examples here. This is Osage orange trees, obviously not native to South Carolina. And we've got 46 of them right now that are research grade all over South Carolina. And I'm willing to bet that 3/4 of those were planted probably in some old homestead, like at Musgrove Mill. There's a whole row of them around the little homestead there. But those are not considered cultivated by anybody. On the other hand, I've got 2 of them that are at the South Carolina Botanical Garden that somebody decided to flag as casual. So why are those 2 casual and the rest of them aren't? It's just up to the person who did it. So there's not a whole lot of consistency in that.
You have 3 that are at Silver Bluff, is that where you're in the middle of Savannah River Drainage?
Probably.
thinking about the plantation, so.
Yeah. And then here's another one, heavenly bamboo. Okay. There's 3 observations for heavenly bamboo in Charlestown Landing. 2 of them are considered research grade, which means that whoever put them in there figured they were just wild, and they probably are wild now. But one of them was flagged as captive cultivated. It's casual grade. So I've got 3 observations of heavily bamboo, 2 of which are research and 1 of them is casual. Well, that's not particularly useful in my opinion. But there's nothing you can do about it, because like I said, anybody can go in and flag your observation as casual. There's nothing you can do about it. So this is probably the park that's got, the South Carolina park that's probably got the most casual. This is Charlestown Landing, because you've got zoo animals, obviously those are captive, but you've also got lots of camellias and other planted non-native plants. And what's going to bite you a little bit is the default project doesn't include casual observations. I always do. I don't care if they're captive cultivated. If they're in the park, I want to see them. But the default projects don't do that. Okay, so here's just a picture of a phantom crane fly I took a while ago, and when it first goes in, it needs ID, and then every time somebody goes in there and says, "Yep, I think that's what it is," they flag it, they hit agree, and once it gets up to 3, it gets the little research grade flag. So now it's still possible that that's wrong, but
So the research flag is manually?
no, it's done automatically once at least a couple people have agreed to the ID.
So iNaturalist keeps count?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, because you'll see in this little bar here, the first one it'll just go up to here, then it'll go up to there, then it'll go to there when it's done. Okay, so that's pretty much all I had to say about observations. Is there anything?
Well, just a couple of things. I've noticed some people do crazy things, they put their dog in there and then they put their friend in there.
Yeah,
So you get Homo sapiens.
yeah. Yeah, they do.
So, just warning you, you may come across that. The other thing is if people are used to, they treat this kind of like other apps where you kind of get points. So you can put in observations, but you can also, contribute to somebody else's and say, yes, I agree that this is a phantom crane fly. But what I've always been kind of afraid of, and I've seen a couple of times, is that everybody will hit the search, and somebody will hit the search and they'll pull up something that's wrong, and you pulled up something that's wrong, and so now you have a consensus, but it was just like the first thing on the list, and it isn't necessarily matching completely what the species is. Say with like beetles, there's a lot of beetles look alike. So they say, hey, it looks like a beetle, so I think there's a lot of danger of getting research grade ones that are not research grade.
Yeah, but the nice thing is in time, somebody who maybe is real expert will eventually.
Well, I think the curators can.
Bill, are you going to show us, like, I just signed up for iNaturalist, how do I enter my first observation?
Oh, yeah. We're going to do that at the very end. Okay.
May I ask, all these, you've been pointing out all these problems, there's an oversight committee, community who.
Yeah, and they don't care.
It's just so vast that they can't really monitor what taking out the.
I'm sure,
Well,
it's
they're-
true that Homo sapiens was there.
They're aware of some of the problems, but some of the other things too is if they've got a forum, but anything you post has to be approved. And if it's something that's uncomfortable or they're not likely to change it, it won't get posted. So, now, it's nice having all those observations, but it doesn't mean much if you can't have some way to kind of collect them. And so the two main ways are bounding boxes and places. And my definition of bounding boxes is not strictly correct, but usually bounding boxes are so big that I don't have trouble with the accuracy being a problem. Now, places are things that you actually have to draw, like the United States, the counties, and get a little bit into that on how to do that if you want. So here, for instance, if you go into Explore and you zoom in and you just hit redo search in area, it's going to provide you with a box. Okay, so you can just basically look at everything that's in that box, and you can move that anywhere in the state that you want. And it's very convenient if a place hasn't been drawn and you just kind of want to know what kinds of stuff are around Columbia or around your neighborhood, you can go in there and hit the search. And if you wanted to do something custom, you can also do that, for instance, because right now you can't draw a private place. If you wanted to have a place, but you didn't want anybody else to see that you had drawn a place around your property, you can make one of these custom ones. In this case, it's just a latitude, longitude at the center with a radius in kilometers. So you could, if you've got a small piece of property somewhere, you can make yourself a little custom URL circle and save it and bookmark it. And anytime you want to go in there and look and see, what kinds of things are showing up there, you can do that. You can also do a custom rectangle. I've made this one just for grins and giggles, Swan Lake. Basically, all you're doing is you're just picking the southwest and northeast corners, and it will let you see everything that's just in that little area. Okay, now a place, that has to be drawn, and anybody can draw a place. They used to actually let you do that right in the app, in the program, but they took that functionality away because people were doing too many of them. So now if you want to draw a place, you have to figure out how to do that yourself. I like to use Google My Maps. But for instance, this is Harbison State Forest. That's just the place. That's just the outline of the area that I want to look at. And so here it is in plain view. And then you can also, at least on an Android phone, I can look at it in satellite view. Now, this is one of the places where Apple phones are going to mess you up because you will not see that. As far as I know, I've asked lots of people with Apple phones, you will not see that boundary, this KML file boundary that I can see on my Android phone or that I can see on my PC. And it seems to be based because Apple doesn't like Google. Okay, so now we're going to get into one of the things that's going to bite you is, and people are always wondering about is, well, I knew I took this picture of something here in this park, but the observation isn't showing up. Well, so here, for instance, is just a thing in yellow. That's a place that somebody drew. And then this box around it is it's not exactly the same bounding box. They call it a bounding box, but it's kind of and you will never see this box, ever. But basically what they're telling us is that the accuracy circle, that little circle of your observations, bleeds out past this bounding box boundary, that observation won't show up. And it also says that if the obscuration rectangle breaks that bounding box, it won't show up. Which basically means, since the obscuration rectangle is 18 by 22 kilometers, no obscured rectangles, observations will show up in 99% of the projects. So you will never see an eastern box turtle in the South Carolina State Parks project, because that obscuration rectangle is so large and the projects are so small, the places are so small. And they don't mention it, but I generally find that the biggest problem I have is that the actual positional accuracy is, if I'm walking right along here along this lake, and the GPS actually puts me just outside of the boundary of the place, that won't show up in the project. So here's kind of explained in a nutshell. I've got a place, I've got a bounding box. Like I said, that's just a hypothetical, you'll never see it, but that's how they calculate what shows up. So this would be the kind of the standard thing. I have an observation with the latitude and longitude inside the place and a moderate accuracy circle. But I can have latitude, longitude with a huge accuracy circle. As long as it doesn't break the bounding box, I'm okay. On the other hand, I can have the position inside the place with a moderate accuracy circle, but if I'm up over by towards the bounding box, that observation won't show up in your project. So, but the one I usually run into troubles with, especially if people try to draw them too accurately, is, let's say I'm standing just inside the boundary of the place, but the calculated location, the GPS, the latitude, longitude, bumps me right outside of the place, that one won't show up.
And while you're physically there, you don't really know that.
Right. Yeah, and so the main thing to take into account, and like I said, this is your location. This has nothing to do with the location of the subjects, the bird, the bee, the bug. It could be inside the place, it could be outside the place, it could be down the street, 5 miles up the thing. It doesn't matter. So when I'm drawing a place, what I try to do is I look real carefully at where people are likely to walk. If there's a trail that's right near the edge of the park boundary, I will bump that out 30, 40 feet. At least I stand half a chance of that observation showing up. So the place may not be exact, accurate boundary, but I'm going to give you a couple examples here real quickly of, okay, here's a project that will actually show you some obscured observations. This is Francis Marion National Forest. And you can see that this little observation right up here that's not actually in the project, but the actual true location is in fact inside the forest. But you'll see a bunch of fuzzy little dots. Those are all obscured rectangles. But the other thing you're going to notice, they're not evenly distributed. All of the obscured ones are right through the center. So is it possible there's no obscured ones out here on the edges? Maybe, but I doubt it. What happened is that obscuration rectangle is so huge that it broke the bounding box and those observations won't show. So you'll get some obscured observations, but you won't get other ones, depending on where they fall. Okay, so I'm going to show 3 examples of the South Carolina State Park ones versus kind of the alternate one. The one on the left is the one for Lansford Canal. And they have a tendency to try to draw those boundaries fairly accurately, and I think to the detriment of their projects. I mean, you can see, for instance, they've got 446, I've got 605 by basically including the river. So yeah, the river isn't exactly part of the park, but, and I'll show you why that really doesn't make as much difference as you might think. So, why do people go to Lansford Canal? They want to go see the rocky shoal lilies. Well, according to their map, there shouldn't be any rocky shoal lily observations in their park because they're all in the river. But yet, I've got 6 observations of rocky shoal lilies in their park project. And if you look at the observations, you can see, yeah, those are out in the river. But all 6 of them, and you can't, it's kind of hard to see because it's hidden underneath there. But all 6 of those observations are hidden underneath that name. So those shouldn't be there because none of those observations are in the place. But somebody moved those observations out into the park place. Now, and so they've got 6 that they moved out to there. I included the whole river, and I've got 35 of them. And most of them are right out in the river. And the other thing too is you look at a place like Lansford Canal or some of these other ones near water, you can't draw those things accurately. It just is not possible. You can see that I took a zoomed in a little bit, and this was their park boundaries. So you can see that they didn't really include any of the shoreline. But what you can do is you can hit this search map area that gets rid of the boundaries and just shows you what's in that area. So compare what's in the park boundaries versus what's in the area. They threw away all those observations. I mean, there's probably 40 or 50 observations of people that were standing on the shore, and none of those got picked up because, they're drawing them accurately.
The ones that are actually showing up in the river,
Yeah.
does that mean somebody was out there in a boat, or does that mean somebody took and cleaned up their data to give the more accurate geolocation of those observations?
Who knows? It could be either one. And the other thing too is, especially some of these, like the orange ones, those are insects, and those are probably just bad, inaccurate GPS readings. I mean, it's not at all unusual for your GPS to calculate a location that's 50 meters or even more away. Back when I used to use my phone a lot, I could take a picture of something at one point and then go 5 feet further, and that location would be calculated on the other side of the river. It's just, who knows? And that's one of the reasons I don't mess with any of that stuff, is I want to see all of those observations. Okay, so here's another one example. This is Lake Greenwood. They've tried to draw just the land part, but basically the actual part of the park. The lake is not part of the park. So you'll see though that I've actually got observations on the land of waterfowl. Well, obviously those waterfowl aren't on the land, but the person who took the pictures of that duck or that bird, they were on the shore when they saw that bird and that duck. And so what they've done is they also did a separate one called the boundary waters. Okay, same problem. There's no way to really accurately draw shorelines. It can't be done. And all you're going to do is you're going to beat yourself up and you're going to lose observations. So I do have some waterfowl that were likely moved out there, but I've also got things that are clearly on the land. And that's not what this part is supposed to be. So let's just compare. I drew one where it includes both of them. It includes the water and the land. And I've got 296 observations when I took this screenshot. If I include their boundary waters and their land, they've got 264. And I've looked at which observations are missing, and it's all the ones right between the water and the land. They're throwing all those observations away because it's just, A, it's not possible to really draw on that accurately. And anytime you have an observation where you're standing on the shore of the water, you're going to lose some of those observations, either because the positional accuracy isn't good or the accuracy circle is too big. So here, for instance, is another one. This is Dreher Island. This is what it looks like in the regular map view. This is what it looks like in satellite view. And you can see they really missed quite a bit of the shoreline. And it's almost kind of ridiculous to even think that you can draw a place accurately enough to pick up the land and get all of those observations. So again, the one on the left is mine now in this case, and I just basically made a big circle around the whole Dreher Island. And I've got 306 observations. They tried to micromanage them and make them accurate, and they got 252. So they're missing, 50 observations by trying to be too accurate. So, the main takeaway from this is, if you're going to draw places, don't try to be too accurate. It's not going to buy you anything. It's not going to prevent you from getting observations of things that aren't in the park, and you're going to throw away a bunch of observations that are in the park. Okay. Now, if you're going to draw a place, they want you to at least look and see if one already exists. So, and this is easier to do on your PC, but you can kind of zoom into an area and you hit places of interest. And it's going to give you a list of places that are in that area. And if you highlight them, it will show you where they are. So like, for instance, this one, I highlighted Sumter National Forest, and there is Sumter National Forest. The other way you can find them is you can do a search. For instance, you can type Congaree National, and it will give you a list of all of the places that are listed as Congaree National. And there's actually 2 of them. The other thing, too, that it does is you don't need a project to see the observations in a place. But if you draw a place, make a project, because people don't understand what places are. And if you told them that I just drew a place for, Belfast Wildlife Management Area, they're going to look and try to find the project for it, and they're not going to find it, and they're going to think you've gone off your nut. So if you draw a place, make a project, and then when you search on that place, it's going to tell you which projects used that place. So for instance, here's the Dreher Island one, and here's all the different projects that used that place. Now, if you want to draw your own, I use Google My Maps. It's real simple. I can drag in things from, it's all the same format as Google Earth, so I can, if I have a map of something, I can use it as an overlay of Google Earth and drag it back into My Maps to clean up. Then you export it as a KML file, and boom, that's all it takes to actually create that place. You just give it a name, tell it what kind of, what they call parent, which in this case is the smallest area that encompasses that. So like, for instance, if you did Congaree, you would just pick the county that it's in. You choose your little KML file, And you gives you a choice of different, what kind of a place is it? And I usually use open places, but there's, parks and cities, and so that's all you need to do. Make
Can you do
the,
one?
what's that?
Can you do one for us?
I could, but I don't have
Okay.
my computer with me on my, it,
Yeah, mine probably doesn't have what you need for it.
yeah, you'd have to make a Google account. Do you have a Google account?
I have, Google Gmail accounts, but I think, with everything.
Well, I don't know, maybe we can try it later, see if, because that's all it takes.
Okay. Because I'd like to know too.
Is there any question about places and bounding boxes? Okay,
I have a question. So, when you do the boundary boxes at the places, people that you put observations in, most of us would not necessarily know where the boundaries are and stuff like that. So we just put in an observation. When there are projects and things that have the boundary,
yeah,
those observations will just show up automatically when they get put in the project?
no,
No. So when you go through it, depending on what,
the size of the project is what's going to determine, all obscured observations, whether you flagged them or whether the iNaturalist flagged them, it's going to go into that 18 by 22 kilometer obscuration rectangle. That's where it's going to go. And if you got a project that's smaller than that, that observation will show up in iNaturalist, but it will never show up in your project.
okay,
So that's why you will never see, like I said, you will never see a eastern box turtle in a South Carolina State Park project, even though there are box turtle observations in there, because there are no South Carolina state parks that are bigger than 18 by 22 kilometers. There just aren't. Okay, so I'm going to talk about projects real quick. There's three types. The original one was called a traditional project, and that's the kind where you have to join the project and you have to formally move it into it.
that's what I was
And now if you do that, the obscured ones will show up in a traditional project, but they won't show up in the main one, which everybody now does collection projects, which basically means you don't have to know anything, you don't have to know the project exists. If your observation falls within that place, it will show up assuming that, the accuracy is okay. And then they have an umbrella project where you can actually gather up a bunch of collection projects or traditional projects, and I'll show you that here in a second. So there's basically the main way you find projects is you go into community, hit projects, and then search. And it'll give you a list of all of the ones that are, okay, so here's the one on the left is a traditional project. This is Roper Mountain Science Center, and if you read the little description, they're basically saying that if you visit Roper Mountain Science Center, why don't you just take some pictures and add them to our project? Well, nobody knows they have a project, so only 8 people have done it, and they've got 55 observations. And the problem is, and this is true of every single traditional project I've looked at, there is nothing to stop you from adding observations that have nothing to do with the stated goal of the project. I mean, they want people to add observations from the little Roper Mountain Science Center. But if you look here, you can see that somebody added observations from up in Travelers Rest, from down in Fountain Inn. So, but there's no place, there's no limiter there so I drew them a collection type project. And let's see how many, they're up to 93 observations. So you don't have to know that the project exists. You don't have to add the observations. If you went there and you took a picture, it's in there. So this is why that is the preferred kind of project now. Because you don't have to, nobody has to know anything about it, doesn't have to know it exists. You don't have to actually go in and put the, as a matter of fact, when you go into iNaturalist now and you say create a new project, the traditional project is not even listed there in the, it's kind of hidden down there. You have to go and follow a tab to even find it anymore. So here's just a typical collection project. This is, again, Drawer Island. It's got a place, and as you can see, I put research grade, needs ID, and I accept casual. And you can put a little banner picture, you can put a description, you can put links to the project, and it tells you how, gives you sort of a little leaderboard of who's got the most observations, who's got the most species, what are the most common species. Yeah, and you can go in and hit observations and see the, so it's pretty handy. The umbrella type, basically, you take a bunch of the collection of, this is my South Carolina State Parks one. It's got all 47 parks. So each park is a project. But then now I've got all of those included in this big umbrella project. And you can actually, and so it tells you, it's got a little leaderboard, it tells you how many observations are in each park. And I can actually go in and click on any one of those, and it'll take me right to that individual project. So that's pretty powerful. So here's the main setup page for projects. For a collection project, the main thing is you're looking for a place. That's the main thing it's looking for is you're defining this project by, you know, for instance, I could have the birds of Congaree, so I would pick a taxa. I would pick the place Congaree National Park. So, as I said, you don't need a project to see what's in the place. But if you draw a place, make a project. Now, the collection project is a similar idea, but instead of giving you these three choices, you're just including all the projects that you want to, all of the collection projects that you want to include under the big umbrella.
Question, what's the difference in an observer and an identifier?
The observer is the person who posted the picture. The identifier is the person who comes back later and says, yes, I agree, no, I disagree, no, it's not that, or it's, and there are people that they spend a lot of time going through and identifying people's observations. Now, this is one that's a little bit pointless, but in a traditional project, you know, the ones where you have to actually join and you have to formally move the observations into it, the curators can actually see the true locations of those observations because the traditional project doesn't care at all about obscuration rectangles. So, for instance, SCAN has a project for all of our field trips, and I can see the true locations of obscured observations that have been put into that project. And I'm one of the managers of that project. Now, the collection project, on the other hand, it does allow people to join the project and trust the people that do it. But the problem is there has to be an obscured observation in the project for that to make any sense, and in most cases, there aren't any. So, for instance, here's a typical project. And under your membership, it will allow you to, do I trust this person? Well, it's fine to trust them, but for instance, if I were to go in and I put in an eastern box turtle, it's not going to matter because that eastern box turtle isn't going to show up in that project anyway. And so the curator isn't going to be able to see the true location of that box turtle because it's not in the project. So, and that's kind of the other problem too is it requires the action on the person doing the observing. They got to join the project, and then they've got to actually know that they can go into your membership, go into their membership and give permission to do that. So it's not terribly useful. I've been keeping a list of the projects I've been creating on Facebook, and you can do that by either hitting # scan iNaturalist, or if you don't have Facebook, you can just go into www.facebook.com # scan iNaturalist. And here's a list of all of the, and once we get the internet up, I'll show you some of these, but we've got the state parks. Been working off and on the public lands. I've got a real big umbrella projects for all the heritage preserves and wildlife management areas. I've got another big one for all kinds of little parks. Hitchcock Woods, Lynch's River. I'm sort of playing with the Palmetto Trail. I've got a huge one for all of the Charleston County parks. And I've also got one, now the national parks and wildlife management areas, they actually did the places already, but they didn't create projects that were specific to South Carolina. But that's okay, because anybody can use anybody else's places. So I created one for the national parks and the national forests and the national wildlife refuges of South Carolina. So,
Bill, I've sent them that link. It was in the email I sent out to the participants.
okay. Okay, so is there anything about projects?
I have a team question. Who's collecting all these box turtles? I've never heard of anybody collecting box turtles and clumping them.
Evidently, there's a trade in those.
Well, where do they go?
Collectors, people, there's lots of,
I just read something about some people getting arrested for a large number of.
Well, I know there's other turtles. I understand you have other siders and fingers and stuff. But I've never heard anybody collect box turtles and stuff.
If you have,
It's wonderful.
I think you see, I want to just prices that gave you $100.
Oh,
Absolutely,
my.
that's your
I have them on my farm.
We'll keep it
I'm fantasizing over that.
yeah, I remember years ago, there was a herpetologist that gave a lecture, and he said he inadvertently told everybody in the lecture hall that he's got a whole bunch of mud turtles in his backyard, and 2 weeks later, they were all gone. So,
There are unscrupulous people out there.
Particularly
okay. Now, the one thing that I can do with my Android device that I really find handy is I can go into the Explorer mode of my phone, and I can see the boundaries of, like this is Musgrove Mill, and it will tell me where I am in the park in relation to the boundaries. Now, maybe not a big deal there, but if you're in some out-of-the-way wildlife management area whose boundaries you really have no clue of, you can actually open up your phone and see your location, which you could do in Google Maps anyway, but it will actually show you the boundaries of the wildlife management area if the place has been drawn. And I find that really, really handy. This is kind of my pick for the all-around iNaturalist camera. It's good enough for birds, it's good enough for bugs, it's good enough for everything in between. And they're light enough and small enough. I get asked that often enough, so That's kind of my go-to setup for iNaturalist. And we're going to go ahead and demonstrate this when we pull it up. But, you know, each of the observations, you can relocate, reorder the order of the photos. You can batch edit the location name. But this is what it looks like on the web, and like I said, I'll show you that when it's. The other thing you can do that is really handy is you can actually batch edit. So, for instance, if I was on a scan trip and I had forgotten to change the location name, I can go in or I forgot to add them to the scan project, I can go in and filter on the date that I took those of the trip. It'll bring them all up. I can select them, then I can go in and change the location name or you can change the accuracy. There's lots of things you can do in batch edit mode.
You have to do that on your computer as opposed to on the phone, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, and this is what if you go into Explore, you can filter on everything from the date, the time, the place, the project. And what we usually do for our scan trips is like for instance, we just went to Francis Marion National Forest, so we filtered on the place, the date of the trip, and then you can actually download that list. And that's really super handy. And then you get to that point, it'll ask you what fields do you care to see. Normally, all I care about is the species names, but there's lots of fields you can pick. Obviously, the more fields you pick, the longer it takes to do. And the other thing the Android phone does, and I'm not sure that the iOS does, is it does have some rough photo editing capability. You can take your picture and you can crop it a little bit. You can increase the brightness, the contrast, rotate. They used to allow you to reorder the photos too, but they took that off the app. But that's pretty handy if you maybe just messed up a little bit and it's a little too dark for your taste. You can just go in there and make it a little lighter, a little darker, a little contrastier, or crop it a little bit.
Don't think you can do it on an iPhone.
Okay. Yeah, people keep with the Apple phones keep complaining, and they keep saying that they're going to redo the iOS app to include some of this stuff that the Androids can do, but
It looks like you can change the basic stuff like time, place,
Yeah.
geoprivacy, projects, but I can change the picture. I could probably change around the pictures maybe. I only have one on this one, but I can't modify the picture.
yeah, that's okay. So that's as far as the slides go. So I'm going to
Do you want to pull up one iNaturalist on
I was going to let you do that. Sure.
but you want to look at just the program on the web?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Presuming that's still running.
Is this program that you just presented, is this available on the iNaturalist site?
No.
The slideshow, this is something you created?
Yeah.
Okay, actually, I'm going to stop recording and then restart it just because it's a long file.